The sky above New York City did not darken with storm clouds. It solidified into a wall of violet circuitry that erased the sun. There was no preamble and no declaration of war, just the sudden, impossible weight of a timeline being forced into a new shape. The Vought International Tower, which stood as the modern temple of corporate divinity, shuddered not from an earthquake, but from the foundational rejection of its existence by the new laws of physics asserting dominance overhead. Inside the boardroom, the air grew heavy and tasted of ozone and ancient dust. Homelander, the apex predator of a world that worshipped him, stood at the head of the mahogany table with his jaw set in a rictus of confusion that was rapidly curdling into rage. For his entire life, he had been the absolute limit of power, a being who could do whatever he wanted because no force existed to stop him. But now the glass walls of his kingdom were vibrating with a frequency that made his teeth ache. He looked out at the city he claimed to protect and saw the Damocles base descending. It was a sword-shaped fortress, from the end of time vast enough to crush the borough of Manhattan beneath its shadows, yet it moved with the silent grace of a scalpel. It did not displace the air, it conquered it. The sonic boom that should have shattered the city never arrived, because the technology dampening the descent controlled the kinetic energy of the atmosphere itself. Down on the streets, the panic was immediate and primal. Civilians who had spent decades looking up to the sky for salvation now looked up and saw only geometric perfection and cold inevitability. Cars stopped in the middle of avenues as their engines died simultaneously, the internal combustion rendered inert by a dampening field that turned complex machinery into scrap metal. In the Vought Secure Command Center, monitors flashed to static and then displayed a single pulsing chronal signature. Stan Edgar, usually the coldest man in any room, dropped his coffee mug. It shattered on the floor, a chaotic noise in a room that had gone deathly silent. He recognized the pattern not from science, but from the theoretical limits of possibility. This was not a supervillain trying to rob a bank or a terrorist group with a dirty bomb. This was a civilization-level event. High above the streets, Homelander floated out through the shattered window of the boardroom, his cape snapping in a wind that felt artificial. His eyes glowed with the searing red intensity that had melted steel and severed limbs, a weapon that had kept the world in a state of terrified awe. He screamed a challenge that was half raw and half desperate plea for relevance. He unleashed his heat vision directly at the hull of the descending purple monolith. The beams struck the energy shielding of the timeship and dissipated like water hitting a hot skillet. There was no explosion. There was no damage. The ship simply absorbed the energy, converting the rage of a false god into battery power for a single hallway light in the Conqueror's quarters. A voice projected not from speakers, but directly into the auditory cortex of every living being in the tri-state area. It was a voice that sounded like the closing of a heavy book. Primitive variants detected. Annexation protocol initiated. Resistance is a statistical error. Homelander hovered in the air, dwarfed by the scale of the vessel, realizing for the first time in his life that he was small. The realization hit him harder than any physical blow. He was not the protagonist of reality anymore. He was just indigenous wildlife standing in the path of a bulldozer. The era of the superhero ended in that silence, replaced instantly by the era of the dynasty. The arrival of the Damocles base was not just a visual event. It was a physical weight that pressed down on the chest of every person in New York City. The massive purple sword-shaped ship hovered silently over Manhattan, and its shadow covered the entire island. The silence was the worst part. Usually, when bad things happened in this world, There was screaming and sirens and explosions. This time, there was only a low hum that vibrated in the teeth of everyone watching. High in the air, Homelander stared at the hull of the ship with his eyes wide and unblinking. He had just fired his most powerful heat vision at the metal skin of the invader, and it had done nothing. It was like throwing a pebble at a tank. For the first time in his life, he felt a cold knot of fear in his stomach. He looked down at the other members of the Seven who were floating or standing on nearby rooftops. Queen Maeve looked pale. Her hands were gripping her sword so tight her knuckles were white. She knew war, and she knew when a fight was impossible to win. This looked impossible. A train was vibrating with nervous energy on the street level, trying to run, but finding the air too thick. The technology of the ship was dampening his speed. He felt like he was running through deep water. The deep was standing by the river looking useless and terrified, because there was nothing in the water that could help against a spaceship from the future. Black Noir stood perfectly still on a gargoyle of the Vought Tower, his face hidden behind his mask, but even he seemed to hesitate. Inside the command center of the ship, Kang the Conqueror sat on a simple chair that looked like it was made of floating light. He was not angry, and he was not excited. He looked at the screens in front of him with the boredom of a man who had done this 1,000 times before. He was a scientist and a warlord from the 31st century, and he had conquered timelines that were far more dangerous than this one. He looked at the readings of the superhumans on the planet. He saw the chemical compound in their blood called Compound 5. To him, it looked primitive. It was sloppy science. It was a chaotic drug that gave people power without discipline. He tapped a button on his console, and a hologram appeared showing the timeline of this Earth. He saw the corruption and the lies and the corporate greed. He saw a world ruled by a marketing team. It disgusted him. Kang believed in order. He believed that strong rulers should lead and weak people should serve. He did not believe in heroes who smiled for cameras while secret agencies covered up their crimes. He decided it was time to clean up the mess. He stood up and his armor glowed with soft purple lines. He did not need an army to take the tower. He only needed himself. Down on the street, Billy Butcher stood next to his van and watched the sky. He held a pair of binoculars to his eyes and chewed on the end of a toothpick. Beside him, Huey Campbell was shaking. Huey looked like he was about to be sick. He had seen horrible things since joining the boys, but this was different. This was not a soup gone bad. This was an invasion. Mother's Milk stood with his arms crossed, looking grim. Frenchie was frantically messing with a Geiger counter, trying to read the radiation coming from the ship. The needle on the device was not moving. It was dead. Frenchie tapped the glass and cursed. He said the laws of physics were not working right. Butcher lowered the binoculars and spat the toothpick onto the pavement. He had spent years trying to find a way to kill Homelander. He had dreamed of the day he would see the supes fall. But looking at that giant ship, he realized that whatever was inside it was worse than Homelander. Homelander was a bully with a god complex. The thing in the ship was a god. Butcher told the team to pack up. He said they were leaving the city. Huey asked where they could go. Butcher said it did not matter, because nowhere was safe, but he preferred to die on his feet, rather than watching Vought wet themselves. Back in the air, Homelander decided he had waited long enough. His ego could not handle the silence. He needed to prove he was still the strongest thing in the universe. He shouted a command to the Seven. He told them to attack. He flew forward with a sonic boom breaking the sound barrier as he charged at the ship. Queen Maeve followed him, launching herself into the air. Black Noir leapt from the tower. They were the most powerful beings on the planet, and they hit the ship with everything they had. Homelander punched the hull with enough force to knock down a skyscraper. Maeve struck with her sword which could cut through steel. Black Noir threw explosive discs that could blow up a tank. The result was humiliating. A force field made of shimmering blue energy appeared just inches from the ship's skin. Homelander's fist hit the field and stopped instantly. The kinetic energy of his punch was absorbed and reflected back at him. He was thrown backward through the air, tumbling like a rag doll. Maeve's sword shattered into a dozen pieces when it hit the field. She gasped as the shockwave sent her crashing down onto a rooftop. Black Noir's explosives just sizzled and vanished, as if the time for their explosion had been deleted. A hatch opened on the bottom of the ship. It was a perfect circle of light. A beam of energy shot down and hit the helipad of the Vought Tower. The beam did not burn. It transported. In a flash of blue light, a figure appeared on the helipad. It was Kang. He wore green and purple armor that looked like it was part of his body. His face was blue, not because of skin color, but because of a force field visor that protected him. He walked toward the doors of the boardroom. The doors were locked and made of reinforced steel. Kang did not touch them. He simply walked through them. The metal of the doors aged thousands of years, in a second turning to rust and dust as he passed through. He stepped into the boardroom where Stan Edgar and the Vought executives were waiting. The room was silent. The executives were hiding under the table, but Stan Edgar stood by the window. He was a man who never showed fear. He adjusted his glasses and looked at the intruder. Edgar spoke calmly. He welcomed the visitor and asked what he wanted. He started to offer money and resources. He treated Kang like a hostile corporate takeover. Kang stopped at the head of the table. He looked at Edgar with no emotion. He told Edgar that his currency was worthless. He said that Vought was a cancer on the timeline. He did not raise his voice. He spoke like a teacher scolding a slow student. Suddenly the windows shattered inward. Homelander flew into the room. He was bruised and his cape was torn, but he was furious. He landed between Kang and Edgar. His eyes glowed red. He told Kang to get out of his house. Homelander was used to people being scared of him. He waited for Kang to beg for mercy. Kang did not flinch. He looked at Homelander and called him a lab rat. He said Homelander was a biological mistake. This broke Homelander's mind. He screamed and fired his heat vision point blank at Kang's face. The red beams hit Kang's blue faceplate. The room filled with the smell of burning ozone. The executives screamed and covered their ears. For 10 seconds, Homelander poured all his rage into the attack. When he stopped panting for breath, the smoke cleared. Kang was still standing there. There was not even a scratch on his armor. He brushed a speck of dust off his shoulder. He told Homelander that he had fought stars that were hotter than his eyes. Then Kang moved. He was fast, not just fast like a runner, but fast like he was editing the scene. One moment, he was standing still, and the next, his hand was around Homelander's throat. He lifted the soup off the ground. Homelander tried to break the grip, but he couldn't. Kang's armor was boosting his strength to cosmic levels. Kang squeezed. Homelander gagged and clawed at the purple gauntlet. Kang slammed Homelander onto the heavy oak table. The table split in half. Kang held him there. He tapped a device on his wrist. A small disc shot out and attached to Homelander's chest. Immediately, Homelander's strength vanished. The device was a dampener that neutralized the compound 5 in his blood. For the first time since he was a baby, Homelander was just a man. He felt weak. He felt heavy. He looked up at Kang with pure terror in his eyes. Stan Edgar watched this happen and realized the game was over. He had spent his life managing monsters, but this was not a monster. This was a ruler. Edgar sat down in his chair and folded his hands. He asked Kang what the terms of surrender were. Kang did not look at him. He kept his eyes on the gasping Homelander. Kang said there were no terms. He said the world was already his. He dragged Homelander to the broken window. He held the former hero out over the city. Below, people were watching. The cameras were rolling. The news helicopters were circling. Everyone saw the invincible Homelander dangling like a caught fish. Kang projected his voice again so the whole city could hear. He declared that the age of the superhero was finished. He said that from this moment on, the world would be under the protection and the rule of the Kang Dynasty. He dropped Homelander. The crowd gasped. Homelander fell. He tumbled down toward the street screaming. He did not fly. He could not fly. He hit a parked car 40 stories down. The car was crushed. Homelander lay in the wreckage, broken and bleeding, but alive. He was mortal now. The rest of the 7 watched their leader fall, and their spirit broke. Queen Maeve sat on the rooftop and dropped the handle of her broken sword. She felt a strange sense of relief. The nightmare of Homelander was over, but a new nightmare had begun. A train tried to run away again, but Kang's technology had locked down the city. Force fields appeared around the island of Manhattan, trapping everyone inside. The Deep tried to dive into the river, but a drone emerged from the water and stunned him with an electric shock. He floated to the surface unconscious. Black Noir, who usually had no fear, realized his mission was impossible. He tried to blend into the shadows, but the sensors of the Damocles base could see everything. A beam of light hit him and froze him in place. He was trapped in a stasis field, unable to move a muscle. In the streets, panic turned into chaos. People ran in every direction, but there was nowhere to go. The police tried to maintain order, but they were ignored. The military arrived at the edges of the city. Tanks and jets gathered on the New Jersey side of the river. The President of the United States gave the order to attack. He was scared, and he wanted to look strong. Fighter jets launched missiles at the giant ship. The missiles flew across the river, trailing smoke. Just before they hit the ship, they stopped. They hung in the air, frozen in time. Kang had expanded his chronal field. He controlled the time around the ship. He reversed the time flow for the missiles. The missiles flew backward. They went back across the river. They did not hit the jets that fired them because Kang was precise. He sent the missiles into the water where they detonated harmlessly. It was a warning. The message was clear. Your weapons are toys. Inside the van, the boys were trying to drive out of the city through the Holland Tunnel, but traffic was gridlocked. Butcher slammed his hand on the steering wheel. He saw the force fields go up. They were trapped. He looked at the news feed on his phone. He saw the image of Homelander broken on the car. Butcher laughed. It was a dark, dry laugh. He said that he never thought he would feel sorry for that bastard. Huey asked what they were going to do now. Butcher pulled a flask from his jacket and took a long drink. He said they were going to do what they always did. They were going to survive. He said they needed to find out what this Kang bloke wanted and then find a way to blow it up. But deep down, Butcher knew his old tricks would not work. This enemy did not care about blackmail or reputation. This enemy was pure logic and power. Back in the tower, Kang turned to Stan Edgar. He told Edgar that Vought International was dissolved effectively immediately. He said all assets and research were now the property of the Empire. Edgar nodded slowly. He knew when to fold. He asked if he was going to be executed. Kang looked at him and considered it. He saw that Edgar was intelligent and ruthless. Kang liked those traits. He told Edgar that he would live as long as he was useful. He needed someone to manage the bureaucracy of the population, while he focused on the timeline. He appointed Edgar as the planetary governor. It was a demotion for a man who used to own the world But Edgar accepted it. It was better than being dead. Kang walked to the center of the room. He tapped his wrist again. The ceiling of the boardroom melted away, revealing the open sky and the bottom of his ship. A platform lowered down. Kang stepped onto it. He rose up into the air, leaving the ruins of Vought behind. He returned to his command chair on the Damocles base. He looked at the screens. The annexation was proceeding according to schedule. The local heroes were neutralized. The government was paralyzed. The population was terrified. It was a textbook conquest. But Kang saw something else on his sensors. He saw the subtle energy signatures of the other superhumans hiding in the city. He saw the ones who were not in the Seven. He saw the potential for resistance. He did not worry. He enjoyed resistance. It gave him a reason to test his new weapons. He opened a channel to his troops. He ordered the deployment of the Scarlet Centurions. These were his elite soldiers armored in future tech. Thousands of drop pods shot out of the ship and landed all over the city. They looked like red meteors. When they landed, the doors opened and the soldiers marched out. They carried rifles that fired energy blasts. They did not shoot civilians. They simply took positions at street corners and bridges. They were establishing a perimeter. The sun began to set, but the city did not get dark. The glow from the purple ship bathed New York in an alien light. It looked like a bruised fruit. In the wreckage of the car on the street, Homelander groaned. His bones were broken. He tried to use his laser eyes, but nothing happened. He tried to fly, but he could not lift his head. A crowd of people had gathered around him. Usually, they would be cheering or asking for autographs. Now they were silent. They looked at him with a mix of pity and disgust. Someone threw a soda can. It hit Homelander in the face. He winced. He realized with horror that he could feel pain. He started to cry. It was a pathetic sound. The crowd backed away. They realized their god was dead, even if his body was still breathing. High above Kang watched the scene on a monitor. He nodded. The symbol of the old era was destroyed. Now he could build the new era. He began to type commands into his console. He was not just conquering the Earth, he was preparing it. He knew that timelines were fragile. He knew that other versions of himself were out there in the multiverse. He needed this Earth to be a fortress. He needed resources. He needed soldiers. He looked at the data on Compound 5 again. He saw flaws, but he also saw potential. If he refined it, if he combined it with his technology, he could create an army that could challenge the Council of Kangs. He smiled. The boy's universe was a cruel and violent place. Kang fit right in. As night fell, the lights of the city flickered. Kang was rerouting the power grid. He was connecting the city to the ship's reactor. The lights turned from yellow to a sterile white. The billboards in Times Square that used to show ads for movies and energy drinks changed. They all showed the same image. It was the blue face of Kang. A recorded message played on loop. It listed the new laws. Curfew was immediate. All weapons were banned. All superhumans were to surrender for processing. Failure to comply resulted in erasure. In a basement in Queens, a group of minor supes huddled together. They were scared. They talked about fighting back. One of them sparked some fire from his hands. Suddenly, the wall of the basement blew inward. A Scarlet Centurion stood there. It raised its rifle. It did not ask them to surrender. It fired. The resistance ended before it began. Butcher drove the van into an abandoned subway tunnel that he used as a safe house. The team got out. They were tired and silent. They could hear the hum of the ship even underground. Butcher slammed the door of the van. He looked at his crew. He told them that the world had changed. The rules were gone. He said that tomorrow they would start doing homework. They needed to find a weakness. Frenchie said that against a time traveler, there might not be a weakness. Butcher grabbed Frenchie by the collar. He looked him in the eye. He said that everything bleeds, even gods, especially gods. He let Frenchie go. He walked into the darkness of the tunnel. He needed to think. He needed a plan. And for the first time in years, Billy Butcher was the underdog again. The first day of the Kang Dynasty ended. The silence returned to the city. It was the silence of a prison. The people of New York went to sleep knowing that when they woke up, the world would still be purple. The heroes were gone. The villains were in charge. And the man in the sky was watching everyone. The timeline had shifted. The boys' universe was no longer a chaotic mess of corporations and collateral damage. It was now a machine, and everyone was just a cog. If a cog did not turn the right way, it would be replaced. Kang closed his eyes in his chair. He did not sleep. He meditated on the future. He saw the threads of time stretching out before him. He saw blood. He saw war. He saw the inevitable rebellion. He welcomed it. After all, a conqueror needs a war like a fire needs wood. He waited for the first spark. The sun rose on the second day of the occupation, but it did not look like the sun anymore. The purple shield around Manhattan acted like a filter, turning the morning light into a sickly bruise color. The world outside of New York was in a panic. The news of Homelander's defeat had traveled instantly across the globe. The video of the strongest man on earth being tossed around like a rag doll was playing on every screen from Tokyo to London. Governments were scrambling. In the Situation Room in the White House, the president was shouting at generals who had no answers. They had launched fighter jets, but the jets just stopped in the air and turned around. They had tried to fire long-range missiles, but the missiles vanished before they could leave their silos. The communication lines to New York were cut. The city was a black hole of information. No one could call in, and no one could call out. The only thing coming from the city was the broadcast. It was Kang's face, calm and blue, speaking in every language at once. He repeated his demand: total planetary annexation. He did not ask for a treaty. He asked for submission. Inside the occupied zone, the silence was heavy. The streets were empty except for the patrolling Scarlet Centurions. These soldiers were not human. They were machines, or maybe cyborgs, encased in red armor that hummed with energy. They did not speak. They just marched in perfect unison. If a person walked out on the street, the Centurions would point their weapons. The message was clear: go back inside. The people of New York were hostages in their own homes. The grocery stores were closed. The subways were stopped. The only movement was the constant flow of drones flying from the giant swordship to the Vought Tower. They were carrying equipment. Kang was moving in. In the basement safe house, Billy Butcher was cleaning a rifle that he knew was useless. He scrubbed the barrel with a dirty rag, staring at the wall. The rest of the boys were sitting around a small radio trying to find a signal that wasn't playing Kang's speech. Huey was pacing back and forth. He looked pale. He asked Butcher what the plan was. Butcher did not answer at first. He just kept scrubbing. Finally, he slammed the rifle onto the table. He said the plan was to not die. He said they needed intel. They needed to know what the purple alien wanted. Frenchie was in the corner, taking apart a small drone he had managed to knock out of the air with a rock. It was a risky move, but they needed to see the tech. Frenchie looked frustrated. He said the technology made no sense. It was not made of wires and chips. It was made of crystal and light. He said it was like trying to explain a smartphone to a caveman. The drone was growing back the parts Frenchie removed. It was self-repairing. Frenchie kicked it across the room. He said they could not fight this with guns. Deep inside the Vought Tower, Stan Edgar walked down the hallway of what used to be his company. The walls were different now. The corporate posters were gone. The drywall was replaced by shimmering metal that felt cold to the touch. Kang had remodeled the building overnight using nanotechnology. Edgar entered the main lab. The scientists of Vought were there working under the watch of floating robots. They looked terrified. In the center of the room was a large glass tank. Inside the tank was Starlight. She was unconscious, floating in a green liquid. Tubes were connected to her arms and legs. Next to her, in another tank, was Queen Maeve. She was awake, banging her fist against the glass, but no sound came out. Kang stood at the console watching the data stream. He did not look at Edgar. He asked for the report on the Compound 5 distribution. Edgar cleared his throat. He handed Kang a tablet. He explained that Vought had shipped the drug to hospitals and military bases all over the country. He explained how they created super terrorists to boost ratings. Kang looked at the data and scoffed. He called it sloppy. He said injecting a chaotic energy source into random biological subjects was a recipe for disaster. He tapped the glass of Starlight's tank. He said these subjects were batteries, not soldiers. They leaked radiation. They were inefficient. Kang turned to Edgar. He told him to initiate the recall protocol. He wanted every vial of Compound 5 and every person with V in their blood brought to New York. Edgar paused. He said that was impossible. There were thousands of supes. Some were heroes, some were villains, some were just kids. Kang did not care. He said if they did not come, he would erase them. Outside the city, the world governments decided they could not wait. The United Nations held an emergency meeting. The representatives from Russia and China demanded action. They said the United States had lost control. They said an alien invasion was a threat to the whole species. They authorized a joint strike. It was the largest military coordinate in human history. Submarines in the Atlantic surfaced and opened their hatches. Missile silos in Siberia opened. Strategic bombers took off from bases in Europe. The target was the Damocles base. The goal was to overwhelm the ship's defenses with sheer volume. They launched everything. Thousands of nuclear warheads flew into the sky. The trails of smoke looked like a spiderweb covering the planet. It was enough firepower to crack the earth in half. In New York, the people looked up and saw the streaks of fire coming down from the clouds. They screamed. They thought this was the end. They hugged their children and closed their eyes. High in his tower, Kang watched the missiles approach. He did not raise shields. He did not fire lasers. He simply stood up and adjusted a dial on his wrist. He activated the temporal displacement array. A wave of violet energy pulsed out from the ship. It moved faster than light. It hit the incoming missiles. The missiles did not explode. They did not melt. They aged. The metal casings of the warheads rusted in a split second. The rocket fuel turned into dust. The electronic guidance systems decayed into useless junk. The thousands of nuclear weapons that were seconds away from detonation simply fell apart in the air. They turned into a cloud of brown dust that rained down harmlessly over the ocean and the city. It looked like dirty snow. The world watched in horror. Their strongest weapons had just died of old age in the blink of an eye. But Kang was not done. He did not just defend. He retaliated. He located the source of the commands. He traced the signals back to the military bases and the government bunkers. He did not fire back. He simply removed them from the present. In Russia, a massive military base vanished. It was replaced by a thick forest. The soldiers, the tanks, the buildings were gone. In their place were trees that looked like they had been growing for 1,000 years. Kang had reverted the land to its prehistoric state. He did the same to a naval fleet in the Pacific. One moment the ships were there, the next there was only empty blue water and a few confused sharks. The message was brutal. You do not fight time. Back in New York, the dust from the rusted missiles was coating everything. Homelander sat in an alleyway covered in the brown filth. He was hungry. He had never been hungry before. He tried to stand up, but his leg was still broken. It throbbed with a pain he did not understand. A group of teenagers walked by. They were looting a smashed electronics store. They saw the man in the dirty blue suit. They stopped. One of them recognized him. He laughed. He took out his phone and started filming. He mocked Homelander. He asked the former hero to fly. He kicked dirt in Homelander's face. Homelander snarled and tried to grab the boy, but he was too slow. The boy kicked him in the ribs. Homelander gasped and curled into a ball. The kids laughed and walked away, leaving the god weeping in the trash. It was a low point that Homelander's mind could not process. He was starting to go insane. Not the arrogant insanity of a king, but the desperate insanity of a rat. Butcher and the boys saw the missile strike fail on the TV. The broadcast showed the forests appearing where bases used to be. Mother's Milk sat down heavily on a crate. He put his head in his hands. He said it was over. He said they could not beat a man who could turn an army into a forest. Butcher walked over to him. He grabbed MM's shoulder. He said they were not trying to beat him in a fist fight. He said every machine had a plug. They just had to pull it. Butcher had an idea. He remembered the legend of Soldier Boy. He remembered that Soldier Boy was kept on ice by the Russians. If Kang was collecting supes, he would want the strong ones. Butcher guessed that Kang would send a team to retrieve Soldier Boy. If the boys could get there first, maybe they could use Soldier Boy as a weapon. Or maybe they could trade him. It was a thin plan, but it was all they had. They packed the van. They had to sneak out of the city. Frenchie had found a sewer line that ran under the river. It was old and dangerous, but it was not monitored by the force fields. They crawled through the muck for hours. The smell was terrible. Huey complained the whole time, but he kept moving. When they emerged on the Jersey side, they stole a car. They drove fast. The roads were empty. The police were gone. The country was in a state of anarchy. People were hiding in their homes, waiting for the next beam of light from the sky. Meanwhile, in the Vought lab, Kang was beginning his experiments. He did not just want to study Compound 5. He wanted to perfect it. He saw that the V in the supes' blood was trying to rewrite their DNA, but the human body fought back. That struggle created the powers, but it also created the instability. Kang wanted to remove the struggle. He wanted to merge the biology perfectly with the energy. He ordered the robots to begin the extraction on Queen Maeve. The needles went into her spine. She screamed. The liquid in her tank turned red. Kang watched the monitor. He was isolating the V molecule. He was stripping away the human imperfections. He was creating a serum that would grant power without the ego, without the madness. He called it Cronus Phi. He needed a test subject. He did not want to use a supe. He wanted a blank slate. He ordered the Centurions to bring him a human. They went down to the street and grabbed a random man. He was a banker who had been trying to hide in his office. He was dragged screaming into the tower. They strapped him to a table. Kang injected the blue glowing serum into the man's arm. The reaction was instant. The man's veins glowed. His eyes turned white. He did not scream. He stopped breathing. Then he sat up. He looked at his hands. He floated into the air. He looked at Kang and bowed. There was no defiance. There was no personality, just power and obedience. Kang smiled. He had created his first true soldier, The Scarlet Centurions were robots, but this new soldier was a living weapon. Kang decided to build an army of them. He would turn the population of Earth into his legion, but the process required energy, massive amounts of energy. The ship's reactor was strong, but to convert millions of people, he needed more. Kang looked at the map of the Earth. He identified the ley lines, the geothermal hotspots. He saw potential. He decided to turn the planet into a factory. He initiated the terraforming protocol. Huge machines detached from the mothership. They flew to different continents. One landed in the Sahara Desert. One landed in the Amazon rainforest. One landed in Antarctica. These machines were like giant spikes. They drove themselves deep into the crust of the Earth. When they activated, they started to hum. The ground shook. The weather began to change immediately. In the Sahara, rain began to fall, but it was not water. It was a nutrient slime designed to grow synthetic crops. In the Amazon, the trees began to calcify, turning into metal spires that would harvest lightning. In Antarctica, the ice began to melt, revealing ancient land that Kang intended to use for mining. The Earth screamed. Earthquakes shattered cities that were nowhere near fault lines. Tsunamis wiped out coastlines. This was the catastrophe. It was not a war. It was an industrial accident on a planetary scale. Kang was breaking the world to rebuild it. He did not care about the ecosystems or the animals. He only cared about efficiency. The boys were driving through Pennsylvania when the sky turned green. A storm appeared out of nowhere. Lightning struck the road, blowing up the asphalt. Butcher swerved the car. They crashed into a ditch. They crawled out coughing. They looked up. The clouds were swirling in unnatural patterns. Kimiko pointed at the horizon. A massive metal spire was rising in the distance. It was one of Kang's terraformers. It was sucking the moisture out of the air. The grass around them turned brown and died in seconds. Butcher realized that his plan to find Soldier Boy might be too small. The world was dying. He looked at Huey. Huey was staring at the dead grass. Huey said they were running out of time. Butcher nodded. He said they needed to move faster. They managed to push the car back onto the road. It was battered, but it ran. They drove toward the chaos. Back in New York, Kang received a notification. A small resistance cell had been detected in the subway tunnels. It was a group of minor supes led by a telepath named Mesmer. They were trying to organize a strike. Kang did not send soldiers. He decided to test a new toy. He opened a portal in his command room. He reached through the portal with his hand. His hand appeared in the subway tunnel miles away. It was giant spectral hand made of purple energy. The supes in the tunnel screamed. The giant hand grabbed Mesmer. It squeezed. Mesmer popped. The other supes tried to run, but the hand swatted them like flies. It was effortless. Kang pulled his hand back. He wiped invisible blood off his glove. He then turned his attention to the captured seven. He had A-Train running on a giant treadmill. The treadmill was harvesting the kinetic energy from his speed. A-Train was crying. He was exhausted. If he slowed down, the floor would shock him. He had been running for 20 hours. The deep was in a tank, but the water was full of nanobots that were scrubbing his gills. It was painful. Black Noir was still frozen in stasis. He was being dissected layer by layer while still alive, so the robots could understand his regenerative abilities. Kang walked over to the window. He looked at his new domain. The Earth was changing. The green and blue marble was becoming a grey and purple fortress. He felt a disturbance in the timeline. It was faint, but it was there. Someone was messing with time. Not on Earth, but near it. A future version of a hero, a rival Kang. He narrowed his eyes. He hated variables. He amplified the scanners. He found the source. It was a temporal wake. Someone had just arrived in this year. Someone who was not supposed to be here. A capsule had crashed in the middle of the Atlantic Ocean. Kang zoomed in on the image. It was a time sphere. It was not his design, it was crude. It looked like technology from the 21st century, but advanced. The sphere opened. A figure swam out. It was a man. He was wearing a futuristic suit with a familiar logo, a small hourglass. It was a member of the Time Masters, or maybe a frantic rip-off. No, it was worse. It was a survivor from a timeline Kang had already erased. A loose end. Kang frowned. He dispatched a hunter-killer drone. He could not allow contamination. Butcher and the team arrived at the facility, where Soldier Boy was supposed to be. It was a secret Russian lab hidden in a mountain. But when they got there, the door was already open. The guards were dead, but they weren't shot. They were aged to dust. Butcher cursed. Kang had beaten them to it. They walked into the dark facility. The capsule that held Soldier Boy was empty. There was a note on the glass. It was a holographic projection. It was Kang's face. The hologram spoke. "Too slow, Mr. Butcher. Come to New York if you want your weapon." Butcher smashed the hologram with the butt of his rifle. It flickered and died. He knew it was a trap, but he also knew he had no choice. Kang was inviting him. It was a game. Butcher hated games unless he was the one rigging them. He looked at the empty capsule. He saw something on the floor. It was a shield. Soldier Boy's shield. Kang had left it. Butcher picked it up. It was heavy. It was made of solid brass. He strapped it to his back. He looked at the boys. He said they were going back to the belly of the beast. As they left the mountain, the ground shook again. The terraforming was speeding up. The sky was now a permanent twilight. The air smelled of sulfur. The act of destruction was in full swing. The old world was being mulched to feed the new one. And in the center of it all, Homelander lay in the alley, shivering with a fever, dreaming of a time when he could fly. He heard footsteps. He opened his swollen eyes. A figure stood over him. It was Stormfront, or at least it looked like her. She was burnt and scarred from their last fight, but she was alive. She looked at him with disgust. She did not offer a hand. She spit on him. She said he was pathetic. Then she walked away into the shadows. Homelander reached out, but he was too weak. He was truly alone. The world had ended, not with a bang, but with a reorganization. The people of Earth were now subjects of the dynasty. Resistance was mathematically impossible. Hope was a statistical error. And Kang the Conqueror sat on his throne writing the new history of the human race. The sound of the planet groaning under the weight of its new master. The catastrophic shift was complete. The boy's universe was now a colony. The air in the world had changed taste. It no longer smelled like car exhaust and garbage, which were the smells of human freedom. It smelled like ozone and sterile plastic. The purple energy field that covered the sky did not just block the sun, it filtered the air. It removed pollutants, but it also seemed to remove the warmth. People walked with their heads down. They did not look up, because looking up reminded them that they were in a cage. In the third week of the Kang Dynasty, the shock had worn off and the misery had set in. The new laws were simple and brutal. Work, obey. Do not gather in groups larger than 3. The economy was gone. Money was useless. You worked where the drones told you to work, and you were paid in ration bars that tasted like chalk. Billy Butcher drove the stolen car along the coast of New Jersey. The ocean looked wrong. The water was too calm. Kang's weather machines had stopped the waves because waves were inefficient energy. The boys were silent in the car. They were heading toward the crash site of the time sphere they had seen on the news before the blackout. Butcher gripped the steering wheel so hard the leather creaked. He was angry. Not the hot, fiery anger he used to have, but a cold, heavy anger that sat in his gut like a stone. He looked in the rearview mirror. Huey was sleeping with his head against the window. He looked 10 years older than he was. Mother's Milk was cleaning his gun again. Frenchie and Kimiko were holding hands in the back, staring at nothing. They were broken. Butcher hated seeing them like this. He needed a fight to wake them up. They reached the beach. The sand was covered in dead fish. The terraforming machines had changed the chemical balance of the ocean, and the local wildlife could not adapt. In the middle of the dead fish lay the smoking wreckage of the time sphere. It looked like a giant silver egg that had been cracked open. Butcher stopped the car and got out. He held Soldier Boy's heavy brass shield on one arm and a rifle in the other. He walked toward the wreck. The air was cold. Inside the sphere, they found the traveler. He was a man in a silver suit that was torn to shreds. He was bleeding blue blood. It was not alien blood. It was human blood filled with temporal radiation. The man was coughing. He looked up at Butcher. His face was scarred and his eyes were milky white. He grabbed Butcher's boot. He spoke in a whisper. He said his name was irrelevant, but he came from a timeline where Kang had won 1,000 years ago. He said he had come back to warn them, but he was too late. Butcher knelt down. He asked the man what Kang wanted. The traveler laughed and blood bubbled on his lips. He said Kang did not want to rule the world. Ruling was boring. Kang wanted to harvest it. The traveler explained that the earth was being turned into a temporal battery. The suffering of the people, the struggle of the heroes, the chaos of history, all of it generated energy. Kang fed on that energy to power his wars in other timelines. He was not a king, he was a farmer, and the human race was the crop. The traveler gripped Butcher's leg tighter. He said there was a way to stop it. He said the central spire in New York, the Vought Tower, was the anchor. If the anchor was destroyed, the ship would be untethered and drift back into the void. But to destroy the anchor, they needed a bomb. A bomb made of the same energy Kang used. The traveler pointed to his own chest. Inside his suit, a small blue drive was glowing. He said it was a singularity drive. It could blow up a city. He told Butcher to take it. Then the traveler died. His body turned into grey dust and blew away in the wind, leaving only the glowing blue drive in the sand. Butcher picked up the drive. It was warm. He looked at it and saw a weapon. Mother's Milk walked up behind him. He saw the drive too. He saw a city killer. He asked Butcher what the plan was. Butcher stood up and put the drive in his pocket. He said the plan had not changed. They were going to kill the Queen Bee. Shook his head. He said if that thing blew up New York, millions of people would die. He said they could not trade a city for a win. Butcher turned on him. His eyes were wild. He shouted that the city was already dead. He pointed at the purple sky. He said those people were cattle waiting to be slaughtered. He said it was better to die on your feet than live on your knees. Stepped back. He said that sounded like something Homelander would say. The insult hung in the air like a slap. Butcher did not flinch. He walked back to the car. The fracture in the team had begun. Inside the Vought Tower, Kang stood in the laboratory. The room was freezing. In the center of the room stood a large cryo tube. The ice inside was melting. Water dripped onto the floor. Inside the tube, Soldier Boy opened his eyes. He gasped and punched the glass. The glass did not break. It lowered slowly. Soldier Boy stumbled out. He was wet and shivering. He looked around. He saw the strange purple lights and the floating robots. He saw the blue-skinned man standing calmly in front of him. Soldier Boy did not ask questions. He attacked. He threw a punch that could knock down a building. Kang caught the fist with one hand. He did not even move his feet. He twisted Soldier Boy's arm and threw him across the room. Soldier Boy crashed into a wall of monitors. He groaned and tried to get up. Kang spoke. His voice was smooth and deep. He told Soldier Boy to stand down. He said the war was over. He said the year was irrelevant. He projected images onto the wall. He showed Soldier Boy the modern world. He showed the heroes of the Seven. He showed the weakness and the celebrity culture. Soldier Boy spat on the floor. He called them soft. He said, in his day, heroes fought Nazis, not ratings. Kang smiled. He walked over to Soldier Boy. He offered a hand. He said he agreed. He said the world had become soft and weak. He said he was here to bring back discipline. He told Soldier Boy that he needed a man who understood how to follow orders. He needed a sheriff. He offered Soldier Boy a job. He would give him his shield back. He would give him authority. All Soldier Boy had to do was hunt down the rebels. Soldier Boy looked at Kang's hand. He was a survivor. He had spent decades in a Russian box. He did not want to go back in a box. He wanted to be the strong one again. He took Kang's hand. He asked who he needed to kill. Kang showed him a picture of Billy Butcher. Soldier Boy grinned. He said that would be a pleasure. Down on the streets of Manhattan, the former king of the world was eating out of a dumpster. Homelander was filthy. His blue suit was torn and stained with grease. He limped because his leg had healed wrong. His hair was matted. A rat scurried over his shoe, and he kicked it weakly. He was starving. The hunger was a constant pain in his stomach that he had never felt before. He looked up at the Vought Tower. It glowed with a godlike light. It was his home. It was his birthright, and he was locked out. He saw a patrol of Scarlet Centurions marching down the street. They looked powerful. They looked respected. People moved out of their way. Homelander felt a pang of jealousy. He wanted that respect. He wanted that fear. He realized that he could not be Kang. He had tried, and he had been crushed. But maybe he could serve him. Maybe if he begged, he could get a taste of power back. The thought made him sick, but the hunger made him desperate. He started to walk toward the tower. He practiced what he would say. He practiced looking pathetic. It wasn't hard. The boys were hiding in a warehouse in the Bronx. The tension was high. Butcher was cleaning the Singularity Drive. He treated it like a baby. Huey sat next to him. Huey asked if they were really going to use it. Butcher didn't look up. He said it was the only way. Huey looked at the others. Frenchie was building a detonator, but his hands were shaking. Kimiko was sitting in the corner hugging her knees. She didn't like the blue light coming from the drive. It felt like death. Suddenly, the doors of the warehouse blew open. There was no warning. A heavy brass shield flew through the air and smashed into the table, splitting it in half. The boys scrambled for cover. Soldier Boy walked in. He looked better than ever. He was wearing new armor provided by Kang. It was tactical and sleek. He held a glowing energy pistol in one hand. He laughed. He called out to Butcher. He said Daddy was home. Butcher grabbed his rifle and fired. The bullets bounced off Soldier Boy's new armor. Soldier Boy returned fire. The energy blast blew holes in the concrete walls. The boys were pinned down. MM shouted orders. He told Frenchie to flank left. He told Kimiko to go high. Kimiko leapt onto the rafters. She dropped down on Soldier Boy, trying to claw his eyes. Soldier Boy grabbed her by the throat and slammed her into the ground. He was stronger than before. Kang had enhanced him. Butcher saw his team getting beaten. He knew they couldn't win this fight. Not like this. He looked at the singularity drive. He couldn't use it here. It would kill them all. He needed a distraction. He grabbed a grenade from his belt and threw it at a stack of fuel drums near the entrance. The explosion was massive. Smoke filled the warehouse. Butcher shouted for everyone to run. They scrambled out the back door, coughing and bleeding. Soldier Boy walked through the fire. He didn't run. He just walked. He knew they couldn't go far. He tapped his comms. He told Kang the rats were flushing. The boys stole a truck and sped away. They were battered. Kimiko had a broken arm. Was bleeding from a cut on his head. They drove into the subway tunnels where the Centurions didn't go. They stopped in an old maintenance station. The mood was grim. Got out of the truck and slammed the door. He walked up to Butcher and shoved him. He said Butcher almost got them killed. He said Butcher was obsessed with the bomb and ignored the tactical reality. Butcher shoved him back. He said Soldier Boy was proof that they needed the bomb. He said there was no fighting these things hand to hand. The argument turned into a brawl. Butcher and traded punches. It was ugly. It was two friends who had lost everything taking it out on each other. Huey screamed for them to stop. He stood between them. He was crying. He said they were doing exactly what Kang wanted. They were fighting each other instead of him. Butcher spat blood on the floor. He looked at He said he was going to the tower tonight, with or without them. He said anyone who wanted to save the world could come. Anyone who wanted to play it safe could stay in the hole. Butcher walked away into the darkness of the tunnel alone. He had the drive. Huey looked at was breathing hard, wiping blood from his lip. He looked at Frenchie and Kimiko. They looked tired. Said they couldn't let Butcher do it alone. Not because they agreed with him, but because if he detonated that drive incorrectly, he would crack the planet in half. They had to go to stop him or to help him aim. They grabbed their gear and followed Butcher. The team was together physically, but broken spiritually. At the gates of the Vought Tower, Homelander stood in front of the energy barrier. A drone flew down and scanned his face. A voice spoke. It asked, "State your business." Homelander swallowed his pride. He said he wanted to serve. He said he could be useful. The barrier did not lower. He fell to his knees. He begged. He said he would do anything. He said he was the best. He started to list his old achievements, but his voice cracked. He was just a man in a dirty suit crying at a gate. The barrier flickered and opened. Kang's voice projected from the drone. He said he did not need a hero. He needed a dog. He asked if Homelander could bark. Homelander nodded. He crawled inside. He was taken to the lab. He saw the tubes of green liquid. He saw the other supes being harvested. He didn't care. He just wanted to be on the winning side. Kang appeared on a walkway above. He looked down at Homelander with pure contempt. He told the scientists to inject him. They strapped Homelander to a table. They didn't give him the Kronos V that made the elite soldiers. They gave him a dirty mix, a slurry of waste V and cybernetic control nanites. It was painful. Homelander screamed as his veins turned black. His muscles swelled. His eyes glowed not red, but a sick purple. He felt strength returning, but it wasn't his strength. It was borrowed. He could feel Kang in his head. He could feel a kill switch on his heart. If he disobeyed, he would die. He stood up. He felt powerful again, but he also felt like a hollow shell. He looked at Kang. He bowed. Kang threw him a bone. He told him to go guard the reactor. Homelander obeyed. Butcher moved through the sewers beneath the tower. He knew these tunnels. He had studied the blueprints for years. He reached the foundation of the tower. He planted the singularity drive on the main support pillar. He set the timer for 10 minutes. That was enough time to get out if he ran fast. He heard footsteps behind him. It was the boys. They had caught up. Looked at the bomb. He saw the timer. He looked at Butcher. He asked if Butcher was sure about this. Butcher nodded. He said it was the only way to cut the anchor. Suddenly, the shadows moved. Black Noir dropped from the ceiling. But it wasn't the Black Noir they knew. This one was unmasked. His face was a mess of scar tissue and metal plates. He had been reanimated by Kang as a mindless drone. He moved with impossible speed. He kicked Butcher into the wall. He threw knives at Frenchie, pinning him to the ground. Opened fire, but the bullets did nothing. Then another figure stepped out of the shadows. It was Homelander. He looked monstrous. His skin was grey, his eyes were purple, and he wore a collar made of energy. He saw Butcher. A flicker of recognition passed over his face. He smiled a broken smile. He said, "Hello, Billy." Butcher groaned and tried to reach for the detonator. Homelander stepped on his hand. He crushed the bones. Butcher screamed. Homelander leaned down. He whispered that he missed this. He missed the pain. Homelander picked up the singularity drive. He looked at it. He knew what it was. He looked at the timer. 5 minutes. He looked at Kang's drone hovering in the corner. He knew Kang was watching. He had a choice. He could let it explode and maybe kill Kang, or he could disarm it and prove his loyalty. The old Homelander might have let it blow just to spite everyone. The new Homelander was a slave. He crushed the drive in his hand. The blue light flickered and died. The weapon was gone. Butcher stared in horror. His ace in the hole was destroyed. Homelander laughed. He grabbed Butcher by the neck and lifted him up. He asked if Butcher had any other tricks. Butcher spat in his face. Homelander wiped it off. He tightened his grip. He was going to kill him. Wait. The voice came from the shadows. Soldier Boy stepped out. He had his shield. He looked at Homelander. He looked at the boys. He looked at the drone. He said this was his kill. He told Homelander to back off. Homelander snarled. He said he took orders from Kang, not from a fossil. Soldier Boy smashed his shield into Homelander's face. The impact created a shockwave that knocked everyone down. The two titans clashed. It was the fight they never finished. But this time, they were fighting for the scraps of a Conqueror's table. Soldier Boy was disciplined and tactical. Homelander was feral and powered by dirty tech. They destroyed the foundation of the tower. Concrete crumbled, pipes burst, steam filled the room. In the chaos, grabbed Butcher. He dragged him away. Frenchie helped Kimiko. They ran. They had failed. The bomb was gone. The enemy was stronger. And the heroes were fighting each other for the right to be the jailer. They escaped back into the sewers as the sounds of the super battle echoed behind them. They emerged onto the street miles away. It was dawn, but the sun didn't rise. The purple shield simply got brighter. Butcher sat on the curb nursing his broken hand. He was defeated. He had nothing left. No plan, no weapon, no hope. Suddenly the ground shook, but it wasn't an earthquake. It was a signal. The sky screens turned on. Kang's face appeared. He looked pleased. He announced that the harvest was ready. The terraforming was complete. The Earth was now fully integrated into the Kronos engine. He announced the next phase, the Great Culling. He said the population was too high for efficient energy farming. He needed to reduce the variables. He announced that 50% of the population would be processed into biofuel. The other 50% would remain as labor. The message ended. The city went silent. Then the screaming started. It wasn't the panic of an invasion. It was the sound of a species realizing it was being deleted. Butcher looked up at the tower. He saw the lights pulsing. He realized the traveler was right. It wasn't a conquest. It was a slaughterhouse. He looked at his team. They were looking at him, waiting for a lie, waiting for him to say he had a plan B. He didn't. But then he remembered something. The traveler had said one other thing before he died. He had whispered a set of coordinates. Butcher had thought they were for the bomb, but maybe they were for something else. He checked his pocket. He had written them on a wrapper. He looked at the numbers. They weren't on Earth. They were astronomical coordinates. They pointed to the moon. Butcher stood up. The pain in his hand cleared his head. He looked at the boys. He said they weren't done. He said they were going to the moon. Huey looked at him like he was crazy. He asked how. Butcher pointed to the sky. A Vought shuttle was launching, carrying supplies to the orbital defense grid. Butcher said they were going to hijack a ride. It was madness. It was suicide. But it was the only move left on the board. The boys running toward the launch site, running away from the city that was about to be purged, running toward the cold vacuum of space where the final secret of the Kang Dynasty was waiting. The fracture in the team was healed by the sheer necessity of survival. They were all dead men walking anyway. They might as well die among the stars. The launch of the Vought shuttle was not a triumph of human engineering. It was a desperate, clawing escape from a graveyard. Billy Butcher sat strapped into a seat, designed for cargo, not people. The vibration of the main thrusters felt like it was shaking his teeth out of his skull. Beside him, Huey Campbell was hyperventilating, his eyes squeezed shut against the G-forces. Mother's Milk monitored the life support systems on a stolen tablet, his face bathed in the red warning lights of the cockpit. Frenchie and Kimiko were huddled in the rear compartment amidst crates of compressed oxygen and nutrient paste. They were leaving the atmosphere of Earth, but they were not leaving the war. They were simply moving to a different front. The shuttle pierced the purple energy shield that Kang had wrapped around the planet. For a brief second, the cabin filled with a screaming sound as the ship's hull rubbed against the temporal barrier. It sounded like metal shrieking in pain. Then they were through. The silence of space hit them instantly. Butcher looked out the small porthole. He saw the Earth below. It looked diseased. The purple grid of the Kang Dynasty covered the continents like a net. The storms of the terraforming machines swirled in unnatural green and grey patterns. It was no longer the blue marble. It was a factory floor. Butcher felt a pang of profound loss. He hated the supes and he hated the corporations, but he loved the chaotic, messy dirt of home. Now it was just a battery for a tyrant. He turned his eyes to the destination. The moon grew larger in the window. It was not the desolate rock they knew. On the dark side, where the telescopes of the Earth could not see a sprawling complex, glittered with cold blue light. It was a fortress. The coordinates from the dead time traveler were leading them into the heart of Kang's armory. The shuttle initiated its automated landing sequence. It did not use retro rockets. It was caught by a tractor beam emanating from the lunar surface. The beam pulled them down with gentle, terrifying precision. They landed in a hangar bay that was vast enough to hold a fleet of star destroyers. The airlock cycled and the boys stepped out into the low gravity. They were wearing stolen Vought pressure suits that were bulky and uncomfortable. The hangar was silent. There were no guards, no alarms, just rows of silent machines servicing other ships. The efficiency of Kang's empire was his most frightening attribute. He did not need guards because he did not fear intruders. He considered resistance to be impossible. Butcher checked his weapon. It was a modified pulse rifle he had taken from a dead Centurion. He signaled the team to move. They bounded across the lunar surface in slow-motion leaps, heading toward the central spire of the base. The interior of the base was a sterile labyrinth of white corridors and floating data streams. The air smelled of recycled oxygen and static electricity. They saw things through the glass walls of laboratories that made Huey gag. They saw alien flora being dissected. They saw weapons being grown from biological tissue. They saw the history of 1,000 conquered worlds catalogued and stored in crystal drives. This was not just a base. It was a trophy room. On Earth, the great culling had begun. The announcement had been a mathematical statement, but the reality was a holocaust. In the streets of Chicago, a squad of Scarlet Centurions marched down Michigan Avenue. They did not run. They did not shout. They simply scanned the crowd. Every second person was marked with a red laser dot. The selection was random. It did not matter if you were rich or poor, healthy or sick, young or old. The algorithm required a 50% reduction in biomass to optimize the energy grid. The lasers fired. It was a silent massacre. Bodies fell in the street. The survivors screamed and ran, but there was nowhere to run. The Centurions stepped over the dead and continued marching. High above the city, Soldier Boy hovered on a gravity disk. He watched the slaughter with a grim expression. He told himself this was necessary. He told himself that order required sacrifice. He had fought in wars where whole villages were burned to save a country. This was just scale. But deep down, a part of him that was still a man from the 1940s felt a cold sickness in his gut. This wasn't war. This was farming. He looked at his hands. They were covered in the blood of his own people. He gripped his shield tighter. He was a survivor. He would do what he had to do to stay alive. In New York, Homelander was having a harder time. He was stationed at the processing centers where the captured civilians were being herded. His job was to maintain order. A woman ran up to him holding a baby. She recognized him. She pleaded with him. She asked him to save her child. She called him a hero. Homelander looked at her. He looked at the baby. The baby was crying. The sound grated on his enhanced hearing. He felt a spike of irritation mixed with shame. He wasn't a hero. He was a dog on a leash. He knew that if he helped her, Kang would activate the kill switch in his heart. He also knew that if he did nothing, he was confirming everything Butcher had ever said about him. He looked at the Centurion standing next to him. The robot waited. Homelander's eyes glowed purple with the corrupted energy Kang had given him. He lasered the woman. She fell. The baby fell with her. Homelander stood there shaking. He didn't feel powerful. He felt hollow. He realized that Kang had taken the one thing he actually cared about, his image. He was no longer the Golden God. He was just the executioner. The crowd backed away from him in terror. Not the awe-filled terror he used to love, but the revulsion one feels for a rabid animal. Homelander screamed at them to shut up. He flew into the sky, fleeing the scene, fleeing the reflection of himself in their eyes. Back on the moon, the boys reached the core of the facility. They found a massive door made of a material that shifted and changed color like oil on water. Frenchie worked on the control panel. He bypassed the security by tricking the sensors into thinking he was a maintenance drone. The door slid open. They entered a chamber that was unlike the rest of the base. It was built like a nursery. There were toys on the floor, old toys, action figures from the 90s, a dusty bicycle, posters of movies that had come out decades ago. In the center of the room sat a containment field. Inside the field was a young man. He was sitting on a bed, staring at a wall. He looked to be in his early 20s. He had dark hair and eyes that looked ancient. He wore a simple grey jumpsuit. Butcher walked forward, his boots clanking on the metal floor. The young man turned his head. Butcher stopped. The air left his lungs. He recognized the face. It was older and harder. but he knew it. It was Ryan. Butcher whispered the name. The young man stood up. He looked at Butcher with zero emotion. He asked if this was another test. Butcher shook his head. He said he was real. He asked Ryan how he was here. Ryan explained in a voice that was devoid of hope. He said Kang took him years ago, or days ago. Time was fluid in the Kronos Citadel. Kang had identified Ryan as the first natural-born supe, the first biological intersection of human DNA and compound Vi. To Kang, Ryan was not a boy. He was a catalyst. Kang had placed Ryan in a time dilation bubble. He had accelerated Ryan's aging, forcing his body to mature so he could harvest the energy his cells produced. Kang had tortured him, trained him, and broken him 1,000 times. Ryan was the battery that powered the time drive of the Damocles base. Every time the ship jumped through time, it burned a piece of Ryan's soul. Butcher felt a rage so pure it almost blinded him. He walked up to the containment field. He put his hand on the glass. He told Ryan he was going to get him out. Ryan looked at him and laughed. It was a dry, terrible sound. He said it didn't matter. He said he was too dangerous. He explained that Kang had modified him. His DNA was now linked to the temporal core of the base. If he left the field, the energy stored in his body would destabilize. He was a living bomb. A bomb that could crack the moon and rain debris down on Earth, killing everyone who was left. Ryan looked at Butcher with sad eyes. He said the only way to stop Kang was to destroy the battery. He told Butcher to kill him. Butcher froze. This was the choice. The small choice with the massive outcome. He had come here to find a weapon to save the world. The weapon was the son of his dead wife, the boy he had promised to protect, the boy he had failed. To save the Earth, he had to put a bullet in Ryan's head. To save the mission, he had to finish what Homelander started. Mother's milk stood behind him. He saw the equation. He saw the logic. He put a hand on Butcher's shoulder. He didn't say anything. He just squeezed. It was permission. It was forgiveness. Butcher looked at Ryan. He saw Becca in his eyes. He saw the innocence that had been stolen. He saw the monster Kang had turned him into. Butcher raised his rifle. He aimed it at Ryan's chest. Ryan closed his eyes. He was ready. He wanted it to end. Butcher's finger tightened on the trigger. The safety clicked off. The sound echoed in the silent room. But then Butcher lowered the gun. He spat on the floor. He said, "Bollocks to that." He turned to Frenchie. He asked if there was a way to disrupt the containment field without killing the kid. Frenchie looked at the readings. He was sweating. He said it was possible, but risky. If they overloaded the field, it might cause a feedback loop that would knock out the base's power, but it wouldn't kill Ryan. However, it would unleash him. And Ryan was not stable. The energy inside him was chaotic. He might destroy them. He might destroy everything. Butcher didn't care. He said he wasn't doing Kang's work for him. He wasn't culling the weak to save the strong. He was saving the boy. He told Frenchie to do it. Frenchie rewired the panel. He crossed the streams of energy. The containment field began to hum. It turned red. Sparks flew from the ceiling. Ryan opened his eyes. He felt the change. He felt the chains loosening. He looked at Butcher with confusion. He asked why. Butcher looked at him. He said, "Because I promised your mum." The field shattered. The explosion blew the boys backward against the walls. A shockwave of pure white energy erupted from Ryan. It tore through the roof of the base. It blew a hole in the side of the moon. The vacuum of space rushed in. The alarm screamed. Ryan floated in the center of the chaos. He was glowing. His eyes were burning with the power of a star. He was not the scared boy anymore. He was a god of wrath. He looked at his hands. He felt the infinite power coursing through him. He looked at Butcher. He didn't say thank you. He simply screamed. It was a scream of freedom and pain. He launched himself upward. He flew through the hole in the roof. He flew into space. He didn't need a suit. He didn't need air. He was a creature of pure V now. He turned his gaze toward the purple earth. He saw the source of his pain. He saw the ship. He saw his father. He flew toward the planet like a comet. The boys were scrambling to seal the breach. The air was being sucked out. They managed to close the blast doors. They were alive, but they were trapped on a dying moon base. Butcher looked at the monitor. He saw the streak of light heading toward Earth. He started to laugh. It was a manic, desperate laugh. He said he had just lit the fuse on the biggest stick of dynamite in history. On Earth, Kang stood in his command center. The alarms were blaring. The energy feed from the moon had been cut. The Damocles base was losing power. The shields flickered. Kang looked at the screen. He saw the anomaly approaching. He saw the signature. It was the boy. Kang frowned. He had calculated a 99% probability that Butcher would kill the boy. Butcher was a pragmatist. He was a killer. Kang had relied on Butcher's nature to remove the variable. But Butcher had acted against his nature. He had chosen sentiment over logic. It was a mistake, but it was a mistake that created a threat. Kang activated the defensive grid. He ordered all Centurions to target the incoming object. He ordered Homelander and Soldier Boy to intercept. The order went out. Homelander was still in the city, surrounded by the dead. He heard the voice in his head. Kill the intruder. He looked up. He saw the star falling from the sky. He felt the power radiating from it. It felt familiar. It felt like blood. He took off. He flew to meet it. Soldier Boy launched from his position. They converged on the upper atmosphere. Ryan hit the atmosphere. The friction turned the air around him into plasma. He saw the two figures approaching. He recognized them. The father who abandoned him. The grandfather who would sell him. He didn't slow down. He accelerated. He hit them with the force of a nuclear impact. The collision shattered the windows of every building in New York. The sky turned white. Homelander was thrown back, spinning out of control. Soldier Boy held up his shield, but the impact cracked it. They fell toward the city. Ryan stopped in the air. He hovered over the Damocles base. He looked down at the purple sword. He raised his hands. His eyes fired beams of heat that were hotter than the sun. He didn't aim for the bridge. He aimed for the engines. Kang watched the attack. The ship shook violently. He realized that this was no longer a conquest. It was a brawl. He stood up. He summoned his armor. He stepped onto the teleport platform. He was going to handle this himself. But as he prepared to leave, the console flashed a warning. The damage to the moon base had triggered a failsafe. The temporal anchors were slipping. The timeline was beginning to fray. Reality was starting to bleed. Ghosts from erased timelines began to flicker into existence on the streets of New York. A version of the Seven from the 1980s appeared for a second, then vanished. Dinosaurs walked through Times Square, then turned to dust. The stability of the universe was collapsing. Butcher and the boys managed to get back to their shuttle. The hangar was falling apart. Debris crushed the other ships. They strapped in. Butcher punched the launch sequence. They shot out of the bay just as the ceiling collapsed. They were floating in the debris field of the moon. They looked at Earth. It was chaos. The purple shield was flickering. The sky was full of lightning. Butcher looked at the datapad. He saw the energy readings from Ryan. They were off the charts. He saw the timeline integrity dropping. He looked at Huey. He said they had done it. They had broken the machine. Now they just had to survive the wreck. Butcher's choice to save one life had doomed the stability of reality. The carefully ordered tyranny of Kang was replaced by the anarchy of an angry god. The systems of control were failing. The power dampeners were offline. Across the world, millions of supes who had been suppressed suddenly felt their powers return. The resistance was no longer a whisper, it was a scream. In the jungles of South America, the trees that had been turned to metal exploded as vines burst through them. In the oceans, the deep woke up in his tank and shattered the glass. The world was waking up and it was angry. High above the city, Ryan floated. He was panting. His skin was cracking, glowing with too much energy. He looked down at the city he was about to destroy to save. He saw the ants running. He didn't care about them. He only cared about the purple man. He waited, and then the blue light appeared. Kang materialized in the sky opposite him. They floated there, two gods of different eras, one of science and order, one of blood and chaos. Kang looked at the boy. He nodded respectfully. He said that he had underestimated the inefficiency of love. Ryan didn't speak. He just charged. The shockwave of their meeting cleared the clouds for 1,000 miles. The final battle had begun, and the earth was the ring. The sky over New York City was no longer a sky. It was a canvas of violence, where the laws of physics were being rewritten in real time. The collision between Ryan and Kang the Conqueror had shattered the atmospheric dampeners that kept the city silent. Now the roar was deafening. It was the sound of a god born from test tubes crashing against a warlord born from the end of time. Ryan was a comet of pure, uncontrolled energy. His body was cracking apart under the strain of the power stored within him. Every time he struck Kang's force fields, a shockwave flattened another city block. The Vought Tower, which had stood as a monument to corporate vanity, was now a jagged stump of metal and glass. The purple energy shield that surrounded the planet flickered and seized, turning the daylight into a strobe effect of grey and violet. Kang was not losing, but he was annoyed. He floated in the center of the storm, his armor glowing with a calm, rhythmic pulse. He used his command over time to sidestep attacks that moved at the speed of light. When Ryan fired a beam of heat that could melt a moon, Kang simply aged the energy until it dissipated into cold static. But Kang could not ignore the boy. The raw biological output of the first natural-born supe was a variable he had underestimated. It was messy. It was chaotic. It was inefficient. Kang typed commands into a holographic interface on his wrist while dodging a punch that vaporized a cloud. He decided to end the experiment. He initiated the Kronos Purge. Down on the streets, the world was screaming. The suppression field that had kept the superhumans of Earth weak and docile had shorted out when Ryan breached the moon base. Suddenly, thousands of supes who had been hiding or imprisoned felt their power return. It was not a heroic awakening. It was a riot. In the ruins of Times Square, a minor hero who could spit acid melted the face of a Scarlet Centurion. A telekinetic villain ripped a tank in half and threw it at a drone. The Centurions responded with lethal precision. They formed firing lines and mowed down anyone with a heat signature. It was total war in a concrete cage. The Vought shuttle carrying the boys screamed out of the sky, trailing smoke and fire. Butcher wrestled with the controls. The navigation computer was dead. He aimed for the only patch of green he could see, which was Central Park. The park was burning, but the trees offered some cushion. The shuttle clipped the top of the Dakota building, spinning wildly before crashing into the great lawn. The hull buckled. The windows blew out. Butcher kicked the emergency hatch open. He stumbled out onto the grass coughing. He was bruised and bleeding. He checked his rifle. It was bent and useless. He threw it away. He looked back at the wreck. Huey was dragging Kimiko out. Mother's Milk was checking Frenchie, who looked dazed but alive. Butcher looked up. He saw the battle of the gods in the clouds. He saw Ryan glowing like a dying star. He knew the kid couldn't keep that up. If Ryan burned out, Kang would win, and the purge would continue until everyone was dust. Butcher yelled at the team to move. He said they needed to get to the base of the tower. He had a theory. The traveler on the beach had said the tower was the anchor. Ryan had damaged the ship, but the anchor was still grounding it to this timeline. If they could sever the connection physically, the ship would be pulled back into the temporal void. It was a long shot, but it was better than waiting to die. They ran through the park. The ground was shaking. A scarlet centurion landed in front of them, its red armor gleaming. It raised its energy rifle. Before it could fire, Kimiko was on it. She moved with a ferocity that was terrifying. She didn't have a weapon. She ripped the robot's head off with her bare hands. Sparks showered over her face. She screamed a soundless cry of rage. She was tired of being hunted. As they reached the edge of the park, they ran into a wall of carnage. The streets were choked with bodies and wreckage. In the middle of the intersection stood Soldier Boy. He was surrounded by dead centurions and dead resistance fighters. He was fighting everyone. He had lost his mind. The crack in his shield from the collision with Ryan seemed to have cracked his psyche. He was swinging the jagged edge of the brass shield into anything that moved. He saw the boys. He stopped. He wiped blood from his eyes. He recognized Butcher. Soldier Boy laughed. He said this was a hell of a party. He said he didn't know who was winning, but he was racking up a high score. Butcher stepped forward. He didn't have a weapon, but he had his voice. He told Soldier Boy to look up. He pointed at Kang. He asked if Soldier Boy was happy being a lapdog for a man who wore purple pajamas. He asked where his dignity was. Soldier Boy stopped laughing. He looked at the sky. He saw Kang. He remembered the feeling of being frozen. He remembered the feeling of being used. He looked at his shield. It was broken. He was the strongest man in the world once. Now he was just debris. He looked at Butcher. He said he wasn't doing this for Butcher. He was doing it because he hated the noise. Soldier Boy turned and charged toward the tower. He leapt over cars, smashing robots out of his way. He was a battering ram. Butcher signaled the team to follow him. They used Soldier Boy as a plow. They moved through the city in his wake. High above, the dynamic of the fight changed. Kang grew tired of the dance. He froze time in a localized bubble around Ryan. The boy stopped mid-scream. The fire around him froze into a sculpture of rage. Kang floated closer. He placed his hand on Ryan's chest. He began to drain the energy. He was going to turn Ryan into a battery again. But suddenly a red laser beam struck Kang in the back of the head. It didn't hurt him, but it broke his concentration. The time bubble shattered. Ryan gasped and fell back. Kang turned around. Homelander was hovering there. He looked like a nightmare. His suit was in tatters. His skin was grey from the dirty V injections. His eyes were bleeding purple fluid. He was shaking. He was terrified. But his narcissism was stronger than his fear. He could not stand it. He could not stand being the third most powerful person in the sky. He could not stand the way Kang had looked at him, like a bug. Homelander screamed. It wasn't a word. It was just noise. He flew at Kang. He didn't use strategy. He used his teeth. He used his nails. He slammed into Kang's force field, clawing at it like a wild animal. Kang looked at him with disgust. He swatted Homelander away with a wave of his hand. Homelander crashed into a skyscraper, bringing the whole building down. But the distraction worked. Ryan recovered. The boy looked at the falling Homelander. He didn't feel love. He felt pity, and then he looked at Kang. Ryan understood something in that moment. He understood that power was not a gift, it was a curse, and the only way to end the curse was to burn it all down. Ryan closed his eyes and pulled on the energy of the timeline itself. He didn't just use his own power. He acted as a conduit. The purple energy grid around the earth began to buckle. He was sucking the power out of Kang's own system. Kang's eyes widened. For the first time, he looked concerned. The ship above them groaned. The Damocles base was being drained. On the ground, the boys reached the lobby of the Vought Tower. It was a ruin. The ceiling had collapsed. In the center of the dust stood Stan Edgar. He was standing calmly by the elevator holding a briefcase. He looked at Butcher. He didn't look surprised. Edgar spoke. He said the elevator to the server room was operational. He said the anchor controls were on the 99th floor. He offered Butcher a key card. Butcher looked at him suspiciously. He asked why. Edgar adjusted his glasses. He said that bad product was bad for business. He said Kang was a monopoly, and he didn't like monopolies he didn't control. Butcher took the card. He told Huey and Frenchie to go up. He told them to blow the anchor. He said he would stay down here and hold the door. Huey grabbed Butcher's arm. He asked what Butcher was going to do. Butcher looked at the street where Soldier Boy was fighting a squadron of Centurions. He said he had a score to settle. Huey hesitated, then nodded. He took the card. He and Frenchie and ran for the elevator. Kimiko stayed with Butcher. She cracked her knuckles. Outside, the battle had reached the steps of the tower. Soldier Boy was surrounded. He was bleeding from a dozen wounds. His armor was gone. He was fighting naked from the waist up, covered in gore. He saw Homelander crawl out of the rubble of the fallen building. Homelander was broken. His leg was dragging. One of his eyes was swollen shut. He saw Soldier Boy. The two men locked eyes. The past and the present of American might. Both failures. Both monsters. Soldier Boy spat a tooth onto the pavement. He called Homelander a disappointment. He said he should have left him in the test tube. Homelander's eye twitched. The purple energy in his veins pulsed. He didn't fly. He ran. He tackled Soldier Boy. They rolled on the ground, biting and gouging. It was ugly. It wasn't a superhero fight. It was a bar brawl between two drunks who happened to be able to lift tanks. Butcher watched them. He raised a crowbar he had found. He walked toward them. He wanted to kill them both, but he was distracted by a sound. The sky tore open. Kang had decided to stop playing. He summoned his full power. He grew in size. A giant holographic projection of himself appeared over the city, towering above the buildings. He spoke with a voice that cracked the pavement. He announced the deletion of the timeline. A wall of white light appeared on the horizon. It was a wave of erasure. It moved fast, destroying everything in its path. New Jersey was gone. The Hudson River was vanishing. The timeline was being pruned. In the elevator, Huey watched the numbers climb. 50, 60, 70. He looked at Frenchie. Frenchie was wiring a bomb made from the scraps of the drone tech. He said they had maybe 2 minutes before the wave hit the city. Was praying. They reached the 99th floor. The doors opened. The server room was a massive hall of crystal pillars. This was the anchor. The crystals pulsed with the heartbeat of the ship. Frenchie ran to the center pillar. He started planting the explosives. Huey looked out the window. He saw the white wall of nothingness approaching. It was eating the world. "Hurry," Huey whispered. High above, Ryan saw the wave too. He knew he couldn't stop it. Not alone. He looked at the giant Kang. He looked at his father fighting in the street. He made a choice. Ryan flew down. He didn't fly to Butcher. He flew to Homelander. Homelander had his hands around Soldier Boy's throat. He was squeezing the life out of him. He felt a hand on his shoulder. He turned. It was Ryan. Homelander looked at his son. He saw the power. He saw the potential. He smiled a bloody, broken smile. He thought Ryan had come to help him. "We can rule them," Homelander rasped. "Me and you." Ryan shook his head. "No," he said. "We're the bad guys." Ryan grabbed Homelander by the cape. He didn't ask. He just lifted. He flew up, dragging Homelander with him. Homelander screamed. He tried to fight, but he was weak, and Ryan was a star. Ryan flew straight at the giant holographic Kang. He wasn't attacking. He was delivering a payload. "Let go of me," Homelander shrieked. "Do something good," Ryan said. For once. Ryan threw Homelander. He threw him directly into the energy projector on the chest of the giant Kang armor. Homelander hit the projector. The purple corruption in his blood reacted with the chronal energy of Kang's suit. It was a volatile mix. Matter meets antimatter. Biology meets timeline. There was a moment of silence. Then Homelander exploded. It wasn't a normal explosion. It was a biological supernova. The energy stored in his cells ignited the corruption. The blast was purple and red. It tore through Kang's armor. The giant hologram flickered and died. The real Kang floating inside the projection was thrown backward. His suit was breached. The feedback loop slammed into the ship. The Damocles base lurched. The erasure wave stopped just inches from the George Washington Bridge. In the server room, Frenchie connected the wires. He looked at Huey. "Au revoir," he said. He pressed the button. The top of the Vought tower detonated. The anchor was severed. The ship, untethered from reality, began to scream. It was being pulled back into the void between universes. But it was heavy. It was dragging the atmosphere with it. Kang drifted in the air. His armor was sparking. He was bleeding blue blood. He looked at the ship moving away. He looked at the boy hovering above him. He looked at the ruins of his conquest. He started to fade. He was being recalled by his own safety protocols. He looked at Ryan with a strange expression, almost respect. "You have saved nothing," Kang whispered. "You have only delayed the inevitable. Another me will come, or something worse." Kang vanished. He didn't die. He just ceased to be in this time. The ship accelerated upward, vanishing into a hole in the sky. The hole closed with a thunderclap that knocked every person in New York off their feet. The silence returned, but it wasn't the silence of oppression. It was the silence of a graveyard. Butcher stood up from the rubble. He looked around. Soldier Boy was gone. In the chaos of the explosion, he had either fled or been vaporized. Kimiko was helping a civilian out of a crushed car. Butcher looked up. Ryan floated down. The glow was gone. He looked small again. He landed on the street. He looked at Butcher. His eyes were tired. He looked like an old man in a child's body. "Is he gone?" Ryan asked. "Yeah," Butcher said. "He's gone." "And my dad?" Butcher looked at the smear of ash in the sky where Homelander had detonated. "Him too," Butcher said. Ryan nodded. He sat down on the curb. He put his head in his hands. The elevator doors in the lobby pried open. Huey, Frenchie, and MM walked out. They were covered in dust but alive. They walked out onto the street. They saw the destruction. The city was a shell. Half the population was dead from the culling or the war. The government was gone. The infrastructure was gone. The sun began to set. It was a real sunset. Orange and pink. The purple filter was gone. Butcher looked at the sunset. He reached into his pocket and pulled out a pack of cigarettes he had saved. He lit one. His hand was shaking. The war was over, but nobody cheered. There was no victory parade. They had traded a tyrant for anarchy. The supes who had survived were now free, and there was no Vought to manage them, no Seven to police them, no government to control them. In the distance, a fire started, then another. The looting began. The screams started again. Butcher took a drag of his cigarette. He looked at his team. "Right then," he said. "Who's up for a pint?" It was a dark joke. Nobody laughed. They stood together in the ruins of the world they had saved, watching the night fall on a planet that would never be the same. The age of the heroes was dead. The age of villains was dead. This was the age of survival. Ryan looked up at the stars. He wondered if Kang was watching. He wondered if he would come back. Butcher put a hand on the kid's shoulder. It wasn't a gentle touch. It was a grip. "Don't worry about him," Butcher said. "We've got plenty of monsters right here." The camera of history pulled back, revealing the scarred earth. The continents were reshaped. The forests were metal. The oceans were still. It was a broken toy left in the sandbox by a child who got bored. And in the shadows of the ruins, eyes began to glow. New threats, new warlords rising from the ashes of the dynasty. The story wasn't over. It had just changed genres, from a superhero story to a post-apocalyptic western. Butcher dropped his cigarette and crushed it under his boot. "Let's go," he said. They walked into the darkness, ready for the next fight, because that was all there was. The fight, forever. The archives of the post-dynasty era described the months following the retreat of the Damocles base as the quiet year, but this is a misnomer. It was only quiet because the screams had stopped and the weeping had begun. The physical scars of Kang's occupation did not vanish when his ship returned to the void. The great metal forests of the Amazon remained calcified monuments to a harvest that never finished. The climate remained altered, with snow falling in Cairo and permanent droughts in London. The 50% of the population that was cull did not return. There was no magic snap to bring them back. They were simply ash, and the survivors had to sweep them up to plant crops in the grey dust. Political borders dissolved almost immediately. Nations that had relied on the old economy collapsed into city-states, ruled by whoever had the strongest powers, or the biggest stockpile of leftover Centurion technology. Vought International did not rebuild as a corporation, but as a feudal lordship. Stan Edgar sat in a bunker in Vermont, trading energy cells for food, establishing a currency based on survival rather than stock prices. He understood that the board had changed, but the game of leverage was eternal. The technology left behind by the Conqueror became the most valuable resource on the planet. Scavengers hunted for Centurion rifles and gravity drives, killing each other for a piece of the future. The compound phi that Kang had purified into Kronos 5 became a street drug that didn't just give powers, but gave visions of other timelines, driving users to a madness where they remembered lives they never lived. The Deep, who had escaped the harvesting tanks, declared himself the king of the flooded zones, ruling the submerged ruins of Florida with a cult of aquatic mutants. He was a joke no longer, but a warlord who drowned dissenters. Soldier Boy was never found. Rumors placed him in the radioactive wastes of the Midwest, a wandering berserker who killed anything that made a sound. He had become a ghost story used to frighten children into silence. A Benettenent Air for Billy Butcher and his team did not retire. There was no sunset to ride into. The world was now infested with unsupervised superhumans who had tasted true chaos and liked the flavor. The boys became drifters, moving from settlement to settlement, putting down petty tyrants who thought laser eyes made them gods. They were tired men, fighting an endless war, but they fought with a grim satisfaction. They knew the truth that the rest of the world tried to ignore. They knew that the sky was not a ceiling but a door, and they knew that while Kang was gone, he had marked the map. Other things were out there in the deep time. Ryan drifted above the cloud layer, a lonely sentinel who never touched the ground. He was the nuclear deterrent of a broken world. He watched the stars not for hope but for the glint of purple light. He had learned the hardest lesson of all. Peace is not a natural state. It is just the time you spend reloading. The story of the boys was no longer about revenge against a company. It was about the endurance of the human cockroach against the boot of the cosmos. The timeline continued, but it limped, and in the dark corners of the ruined cities, new eyes opened, glowing with the radiation of the future, waiting for their turn to conquer the ash.